Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining our webinar here today. So the topic of the webinar being brought to you today by Zebra is why the blockchain for traceability, simplifying access to data and business insights. So this is the third webinar in our 6-part series on Savannah. And today we are joined by a guest speaker in addition to the folks from Zebra. So we've got myself, Regional Product Manager from Zebra. We've got Nathan Clevenger, who's our Director of Software R&D. Then from the IOT Foundation, we're excited to be joined by Jens, who's Head of Global Trade and Supply Chains over at IOTA. And then we have Dan Quigliana, who's our Global Zebra Data Services Product Lead. So before we get into the webinar itself, just a reminder that on the right of your screen, you should see the Go to Webinar tab. If you have a question whilst we're going through the webinar, please just pop it in there and we will make sure that we get to all of your questions. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Jens.
Thank you very much, Alex, and welcome everyone. Very excited to talk here today. Just a little bit background about myself. As you mentioned, Alex, I work for the IOT Foundation, and I have a background before that where I worked for Maersk, a shipping company, and in consultancies. And I joined the IOT Foundation a little more than 2 years ago, which was actually almost a time when we were funded as a non-for-profit registered in Germany. So just 2 words about who we are. And then I will be speaking a little bit more about use cases. So even we were founded in 2013, actually the work started back in 13, yeah. That's when our founders started the work. And as mentioned, we are non-for-profit, and we are one of the leading organizations on the research and development of distributed ledger technologies. This is an open source technology that we deliver. And you can find it available through our websites or on GitHub and so on, where we have different libraries on JavaScript, C++, and Rust. So we are member of a number of other organizations, such as the Eclipse Foundation and Linux and so on, to standardize the whole space and all these technologies. And we are, as a foundation, around 120 people today, located in 23 countries. So this was just a little bit of background on who we are. But today, my task is really to give you some examples of track and trace and supply chains, and also just to give you a little bit of background on what is a blockchain technology. And I have approximately 20 minutes to do that maximum. So I'm hoping I can leave everyone with both a little bit of insights to understanding of the technology if you're a first timer to this, but also why this technology has importance for track and trace and supply chain cases. So the slide you see here illustrates very simply a supply chain with the yellow line there. And I often refer to supply chains as multiple sets of black boxes. There are multiple actors in supply chains, and each have information about any product or parcel or consignment. And in most cases, these data are only shared either one step up or one step down the supply chain, and thus makes the rest of the supply chain kind of a black box to every actor. So, you know, information will be shared on emails, or documents, or simply rekeyed into new systems and so on. And a full holistic view is often missing, and therefore coordination can be difficult. And when we talk about track and trace, it often refers to a number of use cases, such as better coordination from producer to distributor in times of delivery, just-in-time delivery, recalls, predictions on demands, and these kind of things. But there are also other use cases, like you want to have access to any product. You want to have access to its origin, its certificate of origin for, let's say, this product crosses many times for automotive supply chains. You often assemble in one country and things move back into the same country again. and therefore you want to have access to the origin of these products that have already been taxed once. Or there's ethical trade and product provenance. And we see an interesting thing happening at the moment, that a lot of the data from the supply chains that is normally B2B, business to business, is also starting to be shared with the consumer. And you see this, that these two worlds are not as disconnected as they used to be. And these ethical product provenance use cases is really about getting data of the producer and how it's produced, and prove to the consumer when they access a product that this is how it was produced. And in line with these, another use case is really to prove that it's an authentic product. When we're talking wine or olive oil or luxury goods or spare parts, there's a huge market for fake products, and there's a growing need to actually show that these products are authentic. There are some missing pieces why we don't have this working very well today, and I listed 3 missing pieces here. The first one is what I call the physical to digital link. How do you ensure that when you have a product that you have a digital twin of it? If we want to start to coordinate, we need what we conceptually call digital twins. That means that we can link any physical product, let's say with a QR code or RFID or some kind of tag, and then have a digital manipulable twin of it that we can start to share with other actors. We also need the fact that we can trace data back to its source, so we know who has provided what kind of data, and that gives data accountability. And the last thing we need is that data is immutable. That means that we can trust the data we get in, that knows not somebody has somehow manipulated this data for own purpose throughout the supply chain. So these are some of the use cases that we see use cases. I'll come back to a use case that we're working on at the moment to illustrate further, but I'll just give you a few sentences about what is blockchain. So today, what we have and traditionally what we have is that we have given trust to one entity. We're giving it to, traditionally we talk about banks. That means they run the ledger. If they know how much I have in my bank account, if I pay with my MasterCard or credit card, they will keep the ledger of what goes in and out, and all data is recorded here in that ledger. And we give a lot of trust to that entity to maintain the truth. So in blockchain, it's a little bit different, as you see illustrated on the right here. Here we, instead of having one entity, we have a distributed net of entities that all keeps a ledger running. So they all make a note of what is happening. Let's say if I pay Alex $10 and he pays me back $5, they all keep a record of all these events. And the truth is simply what is consensus between all these ledgers. So if 51% believe that Alex owes me $5 after this, well, Alex owes me $5. That's the truth. And why we call it blockchain is that in periods of time, a number of transactions will be formed in a block, and you can say and frozen. And then a new block will be formed later, and these blocks will then reference the blocks before them mathematically. And that means that if you want to go in and change any data, then you have to not only manipulate and get into all these, minimum 51% of the other ledgers in principle, but you also need to manipulate all other data coming later because they reference each other, these data. So that's why I call blockchain, chain of blocks, and that provides the trust in data. And we need that when we want to. So in supply chain, if we have the time and date of an event, you have some information and who uploaded and so on. We need that kind of trust and accountability, and that starts to enable the use cases I talked about before. There's there's a few more things to it, like you can encrypt your data, so not all the nodes that runs these instances of the ledger actually can see the content of a transaction, but they still keep the transaction and the truth. But you need a key or an encryption, so you can start to also make sure who is actually accessing what kind of data. And then things get more and more, you can design it more and more complicated. So if we look at blockchains today, they have some challenges, and some of these challenges I've listed here, and one of them is because they need to form these blocks. These blocks can only contain a certain amount of transactions per block that's formed, and because there is many instances of these blocks, many ledgers, nodes running globally, there's a latency for how often these blocks actually can be formed and data shared. And that means that we call it the scalability problem, that if you look at Bitcoin or Ethereum, the maximum transactions today on Bitcoin is 7 TPC, which means transactions per second, or for Ethereum is around 15 transactions per second. And you also need miners to form these blocks and to hold all these different ledgers. So there's a fee, or sometimes referred to a gas, which is the incentive for blockchain to work and for these miners actually to hold the ledger. But that gives us on traditional blockchains, two types of users with conflicting interest. You as a user who wants transactions out there, and the miners who wants fees for holding these. And you want this as cheap, and the miners, of course, they want it's as with the highest possible incentive for them. So there are new data structures coming out, and one of them is Tangle, that is released by the IOT Foundation, which would solve the immutability a little bit different. Here there's no blocks and there's no chain. So that is why it's not a blockchain, but it's a distributed ledger technology. And there is, how it works very briefly, just to give you an image of that, is that when a new transaction comes in, on the slide before, Alex, from a transaction, you could say on the right, then that transaction will then reference two other transactions that will reference two other transactions, and you start to have this web of references. So this happens for every transaction when it comes in. So instead of forming blocks, you actually have all these transactions referencing each other in this kind of web. And as more and more transactions are added, they all reference each other, and then you get this web of connectiveness, and thus you get the integrity of those transactions. So if we move to the next slide, thanks, Alex. You get exactly something we illustrated with the beast you see at the right, where all transactions are secured by referencing each other, and this gives some very new interesting features. And firstly, because everyone that issues transactions also are referencing other transactions, a user also becomes a miner, which you don't have in traditional blockchain. So therefore, there are no fees. But that doesn't mean it doesn't cost anything, but you need to run the infrastructure because you need to run the nodes. And when you put out a transaction, your infrastructure will help confirm two other transactions. It's a lightweight node, but you add a little CPU power, so every user is, you could say, supporting each other in this system, and therefore there are no fees. And this zero fee for the transactions is very important because you don't have to hold IOTA tokens to use the technology, and therefore you don't have to think about regulatory requirements around cryptocurrency, who still is an evolving topic in the legal landscape. But we can use it for data without any concerns around that as a starting point. And secondly, the model really scales better, the one transaction's in to reference two others. So currently, the Tangle runs around 300 transactions per second on the mainnet, and we're expecting that number to multiply by 3 or 4 during this year. as we see work from our research departments are making the way to our engineering and testers and releases coming up the next couple months. So these are some of the interesting features around the Tangle. And then there is some extra things that you can manipulate, like privacies and permissions, and that will be useful for when you want to have a digital twin of a product. So today I want to share a use case we're currently involved with and illustrate how we use this tech. So we're involved in East Africa at the moment, where we work with governments, and we work with an institution called Trademark East Africa to build something called the Trade Logistics Information Pipeline. It is what it says it is here. The purpose is really to enhance trade facilitation. That means the system is built so that traders can share data and receive data for governments and border agencies. So when they want to obtain a trade export certificate or phytosanitary certificate or certificate of origin, they can upload the data, and the border agencies and the government agencies, they can issue these certificates, and they make sure that these certificates are authentic. But furthermore, the trader can also start to share some of this information with logistics providers or other along the supply chain. So you have this single version of truth where people can see what's going on and share data and have accountability, because you have to, it will be recorded also who actually uploaded each transaction. And the key thing about this is that when it reaches destination markets, customs in destination markets can trust those certificates are authentic and issued by the relevant governments. So how we built this, and this is to illustrate some of the feasibility of using this technology for these cases, is that we asked everybody to come into a room actually for a couple of days. And when I mean everybody, I mean traders, transporters, different agencies from the government and so on. And we asked them to give us some design principles. It, of course, the solution have to enable time savings. But most importantly, also, it had to make this single version of the truth accessible to everyone. And that is maintained by the immutability and using the Tangle as a transaction layer. That also means that it can accommodate current infrastructure, and you can build on current infrastructure. You can build on those data silos that the different institutions have. They have different databases and availability and so on. And nothing changes there, but you use the distributed ledger on top, the Tangle on top, to actually start to as a transaction layer to show the integrity, to ensure the integrity of the data and show who is uploading what. So you don't have to change infrastructure, and that makes it not that expensive actually to build these kind of thin layers on top. And then they have another requirement, which they have more difficulty explaining, but that was, you know, the infrastructure has to be owned by everyone. This is a public infrastructure that many users. And the key thing is here is that everybody who uploads data should be allowed to make own permissions of who can see this data. So you have this distributed control instead of a centralized control where the bank were holding all the data. Every user actually have a control of what they upload themselves, and what they want to share and with who. So you start to have this decentralized organization where you can't log in one central place and hack that or get access to everything, and everybody can control who they want to work with, but you actually have a convening thin layer on top where people can share these data. We have a little video. It's not that long, but we just want to show, you know, some of the actors speaking about this information. And yeah, I feared we just tested it before we started. Sorry, there's something wrong with the sound today on this, but you can find it on YouTube if you Google IOTA and trademark. But basically here we find, you know, Masai Flowers in Kenya talking about how important it is that their product reach the market on time, and reach the airplane when it needs to get out on time, and then they can all plan with the Kenya revenue authorities. They can plan with the plant inspections bureaus and so on. So they all talk about why they are part of this project and why it's important for them to share this kind of information. And it gives a little bit of an insight on how much information. I mean, they share here that there's 200 different pieces of information through emails and documents and so on that actually is needed to move this one consignment to this destination market. This is just giving you an appetite for use cases, and we're very excited to work with Zebra on this. Under the we call it right now trade facilitation by a scan. So the idea that can you actually use scanners and readers, and can we give customs a simple reader so they can access the same data and approve cross-border trade through very simple methods. So we work with the IBCS group and Zebra Technologies on this. And I'm going to hand over to Nathan, who will talk a little bit more about these perspectives from Zebra. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Jens. So before I dive into specifically what Zebra is doing around blockchain and in partnership with IOTA, I think it's important to take a little bit of a step back and provide some context for those of you that aren't aware about Zebra Savannah and our Zebra data services. And so one of the important foundations to understand is that Zebra Savannah is the platform that cloud enables Zebra products and Zebra solutions and enables cloud APIs for our customers and partners. And Zebra Data Services are the APIs themselves that enable us to expose data, expose functionality from devices, as well as the workers and the actions. And so, to double click into that just a little bit further, the Zebra Savannah platform really consists of three basic components. The first is connectivity. Let's go back to the last one, Alex. So the first feature is really that connectivity from the devices to the cloud. And I think this is often potentially understood as an IoT platform, and while it does have some attributes of an IoT platform, it's not a general purpose IoT platform. The real benefit of that connectivity is the fact that our devices, from our mobile computers to our printers to our scanners and our RFID readers, have that cloud connectivity to Zebra Savannah out of the box. The second aspect of Zebra Savannah is what we call the data lake, or the ability to store and retrieve and query and analyze historical data around not only the health of the devices and information about the devices themselves, but also the ability to enable customers to opt in to send transactional data like print jobs or barcode scans or RFID reads through Savannah. And then the third component of the Zebra Savannah platform is our API management layer. And this is what you would see if you go to developer.zebra.com and look to consume some of our APIs that exist at api.zebra.com. Now, those specific APIs are what we call the Zebra Data Services. And some of the examples here are things around, a simple API like barcode generator to take data and generate an image of a barcode, or barcode intelligence to provide the meaning of what that barcode actually represents, as well as things like printing from the cloud to a printer. So without having to connect over USB or Bluetooth, but directly printing to any printer anywhere in the world. Device health, blockchain, which I'll talk more about in a minute, as well as RFID read to cloud are some of our other offers. And fundamentally what this enables is our customers and partners to participate in Zebra's enterprise asset intelligence vision, our framework of sense, analyze, and act, going beyond just the devices and enabling our ecosystem to deliver complete end-to-end solutions. So now with that context, let's double click and go to the next slide, Alex, about specifically what we're doing with blockchain and how this fits in with some of the examples that Jens from IOTA gave earlier. So one of the things that we heard from our customers was actually exactly what Jens said on one of his first slides, which is the challenges with implementing blockchain are almost always at that very first step, that digital to physical divide, or that interface. Because if you think about it, doing a purely digital action, let's say like a cryptocurrency type of transaction that's all digital, that's pretty simple and straightforward to do in a way. But if the moment you want to try to take a physical action, like products being shipped cross border in a trade type of example, with the East Africa Trademark Organization as an example, the real challenge then becomes, how do you bridge the physical movement of goods with that digital representation in the blockchain? And we also heard from quite a few customers. I think there was a recent IDC report that talked about how in the last couple of years, 95% of the Fortune 1000 have done at least one proof of around blockchain. And so this is something that a lot of organizations are and trying to figure out how to accomplish this. But again, this point of friction in bridging what's physically happening in reality with the digital representation on a blockchain or Tangle type of environment is really something that we think that Zebra is in a really good position to enable. And so, taking advantage of the fact that our devices now have out-of-the-box cloud connectivity, being able to opt in to send your print job to the cloud, send your RFID tag reads, send your scan to the cloud, and without having to do systems integration, without having to connect your backend ERP systems or your supply chain systems, or manually connect those potentially hundreds of data points that are happening in your IT systems with a blockchain or a ledger. We realized that there was an opportunity to directly tie those scan, print, and read events to not just a single specific blockchain, but really enable customers to integrate with the blockchains of their choice. So our Zebra blockchain traceability offering today supports Hyperledger. That is our one production implementation today. We have 3 other integrations that are in development and what we call Sandbox, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. But that includes the IBM Food Trust. There's a pharmaceutical blockchain called Remedy, as well as the IOTA Tangle. And so if we go to the next slide, one of the other interesting things that Jens mentioned earlier in his presentation as well was how some of these trade types of solutions, because the physical goods are already moving through certain customs checkpoints. For example, being able to leverage a technology like RFID, so that an organization and governments don't necessarily have to change their business processes, but be able to leverage the addition of RFID technology to pick up the flow of goods as they pass through certain checkpoints. One of the really exciting opportunities is, especially with this type of blockchain application, the concept of RFID read to cloud. And this is a new offering that we have in beta this quarter and is shipping from factory for Zebra fixed readers like our FX7500, our FX9600, and our transition reader in Q4. And what this enables is, while traditionally RFID, fixed types of deployments like this, traditionally these types of deployments have used on-premise servers with on-premise RFID middleware, and those types of deployments don't necessarily lend themselves to some of the types of applications that are necessary for this type of track and trace, blockchain traceability use case like Jens was mentioning earlier. And so what this RFID read to cloud enables is the ability to plug in a fixed RFID reader, get get power over Ethernet, but also get cloud connectivity over Ethernet, and then leverage that out-of-the-box cloud connectivity to manage your readers in the cloud, as well as filter a lot of those duplicate reads and apply logic that traditionally might have lived on an on-premise RFID middleware server, but take advantage of the fact that these devices now have much more powerful compute capabilities. And as part of this offer, we've moved a lot of the filtering and logic and filter management capabilities onto the reader themselves. And so what this really enables is the ability to start to deploy a different category of RFID application that might not have made sense in the past. And so if we go to the next slide, Alex, we'll see that here is the application that the IBCS group built in partnership with IOTA on the Tangle with our Zebra fixed RFID readers with RFID read to cloud. And so what you're seeing is a product that rather than be tagged with a traditional barcode label, replace that barcode label with a printed and encoded RFID label, and that through a really simple integration enables those events to automatically be stored on the Tangle, which then enables this sort of workflow view that you see here, where a product consignment is created with an invoice. There's all the appropriate certificates for export, and then as the products flow through the global supply chain, the events and records can be automatically recorded on the Tangle without additional manual work or manual keyed entry. So if we go to the next slide here, so the Savannah Sandbox is actually where you'll see coming shortly in the prototypes area a pre-built integration with the IOTA Tangle. And so if this is something that you're interested in, we'd love to hear your feedback and work with us to help evolve this integration. As I mentioned, our blockchain integration with Hyperledger is commercially available today, but the IOTA Tangle integration will initially be released in the Savannah Sandbox as a prototype. And you can learn more at developer.zebra.com/sandbox. At the same time, if you want to learn more about IOTA, you can visit that at iota.org. And so I see there's a quick poll here on just getting a sense of how many folks here on this webinar have registered with the Zebra Developer Portal. And it looks right now like actually about 2/3 of folks have not registered. So we would really encourage you, if this is something that you're interested in, either you yourself or the developers or technical folks on your team, to go ahead and visit developer.zebra.com, register. You can explore both our commercially available APIs today, as well as look at the Savannah Sandbox to see some of the new data services that will be coming to market shortly. And so with that, and to give a little bit more examples of some of the currently available Zebra data services in our portfolio, I want to hand things over to Dan Qualiana.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Nathan. So it's been great hearing a lot about, kind of some of these enterprise use cases, how everything's coming together, and how Zebra, IOTA are partnering together and working with some of our other partners to pull out some of these solutions. We did want to just kind of briefly give a little bit more on the broader portfolio of Zebra data services that we'll be following up over the next few weeks with some deep dive webinars. So looking through this, I think, one of the things Nathan dove in a little bit on the RFID read to cloud, as Alex is going to show our upcoming webinars in a few slides, and you'll be able to see we are going to be diving into that. I think it's in probably about a month, so that we can give some real details around that offer and some of the use cases and the value it provides. We also, if you're kind of just going through the items on the left side, those are really focused on Zebra's devices and how we can enable those. In 2 weeks, we're going to be diving into the device health side, particularly around mobile computer device health. So today, Zebra has millions of these devices in the field, and our customers are using them to help, operationalize and drive efficiencies within their business. Each and every one of those devices is generating a huge amount of data, and data is going through those. What Zebra's been able to do is, as Nathan was talking about the Zebra Savannah platform, being able to cloud connect those devices, and we're able to aggregate some of that data. And then working with some of our software partners, such as yourselves and our customers, we're able to expose some of that data out in API format so that people can draw conclusions. So for instance, we have one customer who's struggling with running into, they're perceiving that they have issues with their devices and returning them for repair, and Zebra's not able to find any issues and getting no fault founds. And one of the things that we're working to do is by analyzing that data, by looking at some of the information around applications not responding, the operating system level, the software version of the applications running, we're able to help draw some conclusions and better inform those customers so they know what they have on their devices, how things are running, and how best to set those up for success. So we'll be diving into that one in 2 weeks. We also have a send to printer API that we're working on with the print organization that we'll have coming up later this quarter, so that people can, through a REST API, be able to send configurations, files, and print jobs down to their printers. And we also, for our EMM partners exclusively, have the ability to host and distribute out the Lifeguard operating system updates. And then for those offers that are independent of Zebra's devices, we have a few APIs that are focused on more enabling some of this identification industry. So how do we generate barcodes? Zebra's barcode generator API supports 103 different barcode symbologies. So for any of those niche use cases where you need to programmatically create a graphical image of a barcode, embed that in an application, embed that into a web page, this API really streamlines your process there. Barcode Intelligence is an offer that allows you to send data that would be encoded in a barcode. So when you scan that, any of the alphanumeric responses you usually would get that don't really just kind of on their own tell you much information. But what we have is we have 6 or so different industry databases that we can then look that data up to add a lot more context around what was just scanned and help inform the user on what they should be doing. So for example, we can look up into a product database to better inform the users on what the product is, its dimensions, its weight, even just giving an image so that can more easily for development be able to use that image, or even just for visual recognition for a worker so that they can verify that this is the product that they're expecting. We also have recall databases so that if an item should not be either received or sold out to a customer, we can more easily flag that. So a lot of different information around that. And then lastly is the blockchain traceability offering that we've spent a lot of time going through today. So this is the portfolio. And again, if people want to learn more about this, please go to our developer portal, developer.zebra.com. And if you want to see more about these, it's developer.zebra.com/APIs. We do also have some sample code on GitHub. So at github.com/zebra, there's a whole host of Zebra content that's on there. In particular, around barcode intelligence, we have a few SDKs. They were built out for various different languages to help streamline people's development there. All right, Alex, you want to go to the next one?
Great, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Nathan and Jens. It's great to see Jens talking through some of the use cases around blockchain earlier on. I know that's a big topic of discussion when we have spoken to our partners around, why use the blockchain traceability API that Zebra have built, starting off with the use cases around blockchain itself. So with that, and just a reminder, please pop any questions you've got in the GoToWebinar tab on the right of your screen. We're on track to have a good amount of time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. One of the final topics we just wanted to talk about, the majority of the audience here today is based in Europe, Middle East and Africa. So we wanted to just touch on the regulatory landscape in this region. And of course, we are monitoring what is happening in the landscape. We are not obviously creating the regulation that may come out at an EU level and at a country level. But we do work very closely with a couple of our partners that work in Brussels especially. And from a regulatory point of view, what we have seen is that there is really a focus on promoting activity and investment and innovation in this space. So the promotion more so than creation of regulation at this point. There's a number of funding schemes that are being run by the EU. They also have this observatory and forum group that is bringing together a number of different research groups and private enterprises. And like it describes here, and like we just mentioned, it's really about promoting the activity and innovation that is happening. So, you could generalize and say that, from a government and regulatory point of view, there's a big dependency on the private sector to develop out use cases, to build out proof of concepts with the blockchain. And that's a big reason why, and Nathan touched on this before, Zebra decided to create what we would see as a sort of out-of-the-box API to be able to use, to make it as easy as possible to build those proof of concepts for our software partners, and bring those to market. And also with a low level of investment. From a regulatory point of view, we haven't seen too much coming out, is the summary here. So with that, here is the speaker lineup once again. You've also got the email addresses here of all of the speakers, including Jens from IOTA, who, again, our thanks to him for joining us today. Feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any further questions. As Dan also mentioned, we really encourage you to get over to the Zebra developer portal, and you also saw the IOTA website if you want to find more information about IOTA and the Tangle. Just a final couple of slides before we enter into Q&A. We are taking a number of precautions and giving a significant amount of guidance to our partners and stakeholders in terms of the coronavirus pandemic. So there's a lot of information on the links here. And we are also in the midst of a extensive webinar series. The 6-part Savannah webinar series is just part of a much wider series of webinars. If you go over to the Partner Gateway site, you will find all of those webinars and the associated links. That's where you exactly find the events or the webinars on the events page on the Partner Gateway. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this is the third of our 6-part series on Savannah Data Services. So we have 3 to go. The next one is the end of next week. So you have the sign up link in the website there. Encourage you all to get registered and join us. All of the previous presentations you can find on the Partner Gateway, along with the recordings. If you're not a Zebra partner, please just reach out to us and we will make sure that you get access to that content. So with that, we have a good amount of time for Q&A, and I can see we have a number of questions coming in. So Jens, first one over to you. So we've got a question here about how IOTA handles smart contracts.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've been trying to see if I can follow up and write a little bit of answers. I hope they're visible to everyone. But currently we don't have smart contracts on IOTA. This is on our roadmap. So if you need to do payments with a transaction and have that on a smart contract, we work with other instances to enable that at this stage.
Great, thanks Jens. So we have another question here. Maybe this is one for you, Nathan. So question here about why we chose IOTA. So the sort of advantages we saw in IOTA's Tangle in, making the decision to build out the concepts that we are working on with them.
Yeah, exactly. And so as I mentioned, our Zebra Savannah blockchain integration is not directly tied to any specific blockchain provider. Our goal is to allow frictionless integration with as many different technologies and ledgers as possible. And so what drove the IOTA integration is actually a number of customer and true business opportunities where the integration from RFID readers, barcode scanners directly to the IOTA Tangle ledger for traceability is really what drove demand. And so what we're seeing is that specific industries have specific momentum. For example, around food safety, we're seeing the IBM Food Trust get traction, which is why we have an integration there. In the pharmaceutical space, we're doing a pilot right now with the Food and Drug Administration in the United States with the Remedy blockchain. And as mentioned, there's a number of opportunities around the IOTA Tangle. And so that's basically how we got here.
Great. Thanks, Nathan. Here's a good question. I think I'll hand it over to you, Jens. Can you shed any insights on the outputs expected from a supply chain traceability and provenance solution, efficiency gains expected, savings, etc.?
Yeah, it is a difficult one because you really have to talk what ecosystem are you talking on with commodities and verticals are we talking about here. But just we actually had looked into some numbers for the things we're building in East Africa, which is, I would say, transparency across borders. This stems from the World Trade Organization's only agreement in 20 years, which is the one on trade facilitation, that actually says that if we increase trade facilitation, we could add 5% to global GDP. And that was even before the thinking about using blockchain for this kind of work. So I think we can see a lot of efficiency gains, and that's of course one type of value to get in supply chain transparency, or if you talk provenance. Apart from efficiency gains and savings, there's also the value add for enhancing your product and providing this information for the end consumer. So this gives an idea of the broader spectra of what this visibility can give, but of course, it's very different from the oil sector to the pharmaceutical sector and from the food sector. What are the savings we're talking about here?
Yeah, just a follow-up question on that, which is I'm taking sort of half of one of the questions. Are there particular industries or verticals where you're seeing quicker adoption, Jens?
Yes, I mean, you mentioned some yourself, Alex, like in food, and I think there's something we are still, what is still one of the big challenges of blockchain is, I also always talk about blockchain or distributed ledger technology as a team sport. It's really not the technology that is difficult. It is bringing the ecosystem together and start to share these kind of data with each other and find the business model around that. And therefore, I do see a lot of instances where it's the public sector driving it because they kind of have an incentive to provide such a public infrastructure. So you see also here that there are some drive, but then you also see there's a lot of provenance and track and trace as we're talking about today in everything from luxury goods to wine and so on is getting tested and on there. But it's the challenge of ecosystems that is the challenge. It's not the technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Just an anecdote there, a number of the Zebra team in Europe joined a webinar a couple of days ago on a whiskey company in Ireland who have created what they call it, the first blockchain whiskey. So as Jens was mentioning, there's a number of use cases that are just coming out of the private sector where they see the value and they are building those because they see the value, as well as public sector led projects. So one question here that I think I might take myself here. So how many organizations are Zebra engaging with with our blockchain solution, and how are we effectively going to market? So we have a number of pilots going on and proof of concepts. We mentioned one that we are working on with IBCS that was mentioned earlier with IOTA 2. And we have to come back to the point we were making earlier and accentuate also what Jens just mentioned in terms of accessibility to this technology. That's certainly not the issue. The challenge in often cases is working on the use case and having all of the different parties involved and contributing towards what is being built. The technology itself, and again, we encourage you to go over to our developer portal after this webinar, is, we would say very simple, and using the API, accessing or sending data to the blockchain and how we've built that. The point of actually building out that API is to make it as easy as possible to use. So yeah, we have a number of proof of concepts. A number of the sort of majority of our partners that are working on solutions are, of course, software partners of Zebra. There are certain end users we would call, or customers, that are also testing, but in a lot of cases, it's of course our software partners that are building out solutions using that API. There is a question here about use cases that are documented, Jens. I guess that would point back to the video and documentation you've done on the Kenya project, but I know IOTA have got a number of other use cases documented.
Yeah, I mean, we issue a blog post on Medium. So if you follow IOTA on Medium, you can find many blog posts where we write about things that we've been involved in. And I think I would also here make a little advertising for World Economic Forum. We're part of a working group there that has looked into blockchain and supply chains, and a couple of days ago, a huge report came out, a toolkit came out on many of the questions that you need to ask yourself when you apply distributed ledger technology in supply chains. It's quite a large document, it's 200 pages, but it actually goes through, many of the issues you have to ask yourself around governance, around security, and so forth, building this. So I consider it as an interesting wiki also to read, but of course it only referenced very few use cases in there. But you can find some of Medium as said, yeah.
Great, thanks Jens. So I think we've got through most of the questions here. If we have missed you, as we said, we have our details. Let me just pop them back on the screen here. Our details can be found here. If you want to reach out to any of us, more than happy to continue the discussion. If not, get yourselves over to the developer portal. And you also have IOTA's website that we shared with you to find out more. With that, thank all the speakers, especially yourself, Jens, for coming on with us, and thank everyone for joining.
Thank you, it was a pleasure.